Hi, good afternoon. My usual routine is to do a little earlier today, but I just felt like it's always a good time. It's after 3 in the afternoon here in amazing Hualien, a small city on the east coast of Taiwan. Beautiful, beautiful place, mountains and sea. Reminds me so much of my hometown, Hawaii. But be that as it may, I'd like to talk about. Well, first, let me preface it a little bit by talking about a favorite professor. When I was in my graduate program at University of Hawaii, I was taking a film class, and my professor was well into his 80s at this time. But still, he wrote 3 books that year, just to give you an idea of the vigor this 80-year-old had. Of course, he only taught 2 or 3 classes a semester, but it was a privilege to Dr. Floyd Matson at University of Hawaii. It was a privilege to study under him. In fact, I enjoyed him so much that afterwards I volunteered to be his TA for the rest of this teaching career. And what I would do is he always showed short clips to make a point, and short clips of movies from the 30s, 40s, 50s, and all the way up. And so it took a lot of sorting, preparing videotapes at that time, preparing the videotapes, queuing them up to that particular section that he needed, and then be there physically in the room and work the equipment, because he, like so many of his generation, he wasn't tech savvy. And it's kind of ironic, it fell on my shoulders, and I wasn't all that into tech myself, but it was my pleasure to work with Mr. Dr. Metzen. But anyway, today he reminded me he would what we call suspension of disbelief. He would sit and watch the big video screen, and even though he's seen that clip literally thousands of times, he's still completely enraptured. He became childlike. It's so easy. It was so easy to picture him going to the movie theater, which cost 5 cents at that in his young days, and just watching the movie with that wide-eyed innocence of childhood. But he would just go into this suspension of disbelief. And that's what he told us is necessary to watch a movie. We had to suspend, no questions about, oh, that couldn't happen, or that. It's just the land of imaginary, land of imagination, land where anything is possible. And in a mundane world such as we find ourselves, it certainly was a beautiful respite from the rigors of daily life, even in beautiful Honolulu, Hawaii. So from him, I call him my mentor. He was my mentor in so many ways. One of many mentors that I was fortunate enough to have along the way. Well, I wouldn't say many, but I would probably be more correct to say one of a few, a handful of mentors. Each, in their own way, contributed to the man that sits in front of you, smiling and engaging you. So this suspension of disbelief stayed with me for a long time. And it's really interesting because in my spiritual pursuit, my spiritual journey from non-abiding, temporary awakening, temporary states of awakening to a permanent, abiding awakening. And again, the ing, awakening, not awaked, awakening, as is a continual process. I started in the process of sorting the ego, trying to deal with the ego. And in my case, I was fairly fortunate due to one enduring, I think endearing quality that I've always had, is that I didn't take myself too seriously. So it made dealing with the ego, shredding the egoic mind, shredding it, exposing it, essentially, wasn't that big of a deal. Because somehow I felt never like I had a really firm grip on things anyway, which ironically turned out to serve me well. So I didn't have to suffer at all as ego is recognized, and Maya is the illusory nature of the egoic created self, the egoic created world. It's a house of straws. And I huffed and I puffed like the big bad wolf in Little Red Riding Hood. Or that's not Little Red Riding Hood. I gotta get it right. My fables of my little fairy tale. Not Little Red. The Three Pigs. Better yet. And I huff and I puff and I blow down the house of straw. But one of the insidious, not so obvious structures that we create to support, I want to say bolster. Is there a word? I'm not sure. Bolster, support, to keep intact this house of cards that the egoic mind has constructed. All the rationalizing that goes with this mind talk, one level above the monkey mind. Monkey mind is just that noise, that constant blathering, whereas the one step up, the mind, as everything else, has layers and layers and layers, levels and levels and levels. But the egoic mind, that's what most people identify as themselves. I am that egoic mind. Well, this is bolstered by a belief system. And beliefs, the nature of beliefs is, they didn't come from within. They came from without. Authority figures, parents, the church, our teachers, fed us with the materials that we could construct our own, turns out very fragile view of the world, because it doesn't take much to bring it crashing down. House of cards, as I've said. But beliefs are instilled from the outside inward. If something comes from within, it's much more than a belief. It's much more meaningful. It's much more useful, because all that's good comes from within. I'll say that again. All that's good comes from within. It's here that the truth resides. It's here that you can begin to remember what you've forgotten. You've forgotten your place in the universe. You've forgotten the unified, beautiful expression of light and love that you are. Not only are you that, but so is all. That's all there is. There's nothing else. And in saying that, that's by no means implying any kind of shortage of anything. Everything is contained within the spirit, the light, and the love that comprises us. So this, if something comes from within, it might start as an inspiration, an inspired observation, an educated, evaluated, scrutinized evaluation, which will build into its own systems, just as your beliefs imposed from the outside create at least a ghost of a system, a false system as it turns out. But this inspiration, if held tightly, if allowed to gather momentum on its own, becomes like a rock going down a mild hill. It just gathers momentum. And it needs to be called something different than a belief. So insights. I've talked many times about information to knowledge to wisdom. But insights do the same thing. Insights to, it skips information, okay? Because insight and information are on the same level. Information, knowledge, and wisdom. Insight, knowledge, and wisdom. One is external, from books, from teachers, from outside sources. The first, gathering information. Information outside of you. Insight is what? It's equivalent information, but it's what's in. And you grow this into knowledge. And then you, just as a miner mines for gold, you pan it, you shake it, and the wisdom, the nuggets, the gold will settle at the bottom. Now, knowledge is important, but it's important in that it is the ingredients necessary to concoct, to experience wisdom. So these two, the outer and the inner, there's always a war with that until you get to non-duality. The outer is the inner. You go within and you come out. It seems to be a duality. But it's part of the Maya, needed to be cast aside. Once you're freed from your false reliance on beliefs, and that it's a crutch. In a way, it's a lazy, because rigorous self-inquiry will not lead you to beliefs. Beliefs bind you. Beliefs limit you. insights inspire and open. Allow that flower within to grow. And as that flower blooms, the fragrance oozes out your pores only to embrace the world and make it a slightly better place. And indeed, this is all that one could hope for, is that something emerging from themselves would have some, no matter how minute in the conundrum, the noise of life, could have that fragrance. Those that are attuned can smell it. It will bring a smile to someone's face. And I say, there's nothing higher than making or helping, allowing, encouraging a simple smile. One smile is worth the labor of a lifetime in introspective soul searching and inquiry and evolution. One smile. It's so beautiful. A simple smile changes the world to help make it a better place. And if you can in any way be an agent of that smile, it makes me cry because it's so simple, so beautiful, so ordinary, yet so exquisite, so meaningful, so creative, to bring a smile to another. Now we started with my professor, Professor Floyd Metzen, Dr. Metzen. As a retired professor, us professors prefer the title professor. Most of us, the people that I've noticed that are academic doctors, PhD holders, who relish this, I'm a doctor. Good on them. More power to them. But it was never for me. And the people that I respected, that I gravitated towards, my mentors, my teachers that meant so much, both academic, well, I'm talking about academic, they simply called themselves professor and felt that that was honorific enough in itself. They laugh and say, a doctor wears a white coat. He takes my temperature. But anyway, sorry, Professor Floyd Metzen and his suspension of disbelief. It served me. Now I came to a place where suspension of belief became critical. Now, suspension of disbelief was useful in allowing yourself to be childlike and enjoy the beauty, the joy, the make-believe, the dream that movies can capture so well. A child watching a film, being transposed, remaining transfixed on the screen as he loses all sense of self. Isn't this indeed a profound meditation? How can we have to wait so long and work so hard to reach this simple state that a child at Professor Matzen's time, one nickel would put him in a movie and he's suspended disbelief. But at a certain stage in the destruction of the egoic, false, illusory Maya self is to disintegrate, to die, to no longer exist, to no longer influence. The voice will always be there, but it's only intended. It makes you laugh. I mean, it never gives up. It wants to try and try again. But it's a suspension of belief, this outwardly imposed system that we are delusional in our thinking that this is who and what we are. We need to suspend belief, suspend the systems. And as the ego's dying, in my case, the ego was not a tough one to get past because I never gave it much credence. I was never heavily invested. And it's part of being able to laugh at myself. Who better to laugh at than oneself? We're, at least present company, is quite a character. But this dissolution of the ego, I didn't really have that long dark night where people die, the ego dies, and they're so vested and they're so identified with this ego that it feels like a physical death. Something actually died. For me, it was more celebratory to let go of the tenuous grip it had on me anyway. It was just kind of shrug it off. So the long dark night that they talk about, the spiritual despair that comes in the process somewhere. Now, I've seen enough to see that people experience different things at different times in their process, and a lot of it is identification, how you label it, the function of memory in these events, because when these events are occurring, it's as if time stops, and all ways of your previously measuring time cease to exist. You're in a state of timelessness. So how does one judge? How does one categorize? How does one remember? How does one share that which is essentially unshareable, unique, individualized to each and every one of us? This is the only difference that exists within us, is how we learn to realize the union, the togetherness, the oneness, how we give up separation and division. We each have an individual process, much as we have an ego. And as an aside here, when I didn't mean to say as much as we have a personality. This is what I wanted to talk about. It's the difference between a personality and an ego. An ego is who you think you are. And a personality, from what I can see, is how the others, or who the others think you are. That expression of a personality, of a personality, yes, that we get reinforced and we continue to project. But there's something about this individual personality that's very interesting. It doesn't ever go away. It's not linked to the ego. The ego is who you think you are. The personality is who the other thinks you are. This is individual. This is, no matter what level you are on your evolutionary scale, on your evolutionary journey, your personality exists. Jesus had a personality to the very end. Buddha definitely had a personality. All the Buddhas, past and present and future, will maintain some personality. It's interesting. So this is the only individualization, is that somehow this personality is with you. And I experienced this personality to be a culmination of many, many lifetimes, many, many existences, all contributed to how the outside saw me versus how I saw the outside, until I understood that if you go outside far enough, you're inside. If you go inside, you're outside. It's a cosmic loop. It's a spiraling loop. But in this process, shedding the ego was just like, and so, but I did experience a long, dark night of depression, for lack of a better word, despair, gloom, this dark period that I've heard so much about. But mine came at a different time. When I awoke, it actually began when I was awoke, and I visualized myself as a cast-off baby, discarded to a dirty, cold sidewalk, an infant, unable to talk, unable to fend for itself, vulnerable, afraid, terrified, cold, uncomfortable, because you think a dirty sidewalk is comfortable? Well, think again. Try it sometimes. And despair. Because at this time, falsely as it turns out, you feel tremendously alone. And when I say you, I mean me, because this is the only experience that I had. So I'm here, I can only share what happened to me and only guess, educated guess of what happened to you. You'll express it in a different way, you'll experience it a different way. But what I found is that somehow, unlike a human infant, a baby Buddha, I call myself an infant Buddha, is able to, doesn't need sustenance from food and water and wealth and companionship and care and someone taking care of them, someone watching over them. An infant Buddha doesn't need, everything comes through the light that's even in the darkest dark, this light, this life penetrates and sustains, feeds, thirsts, embraces. So as a baby Buddha, my immediate reaction was despair, the loneliness, but then and the fear of unknown and what happened to me. Because I was a 60-year-old baby. 65, I guess, at this time, 65-year-old baby. But the despair, the burden, the fears lightened because I was cared for. And you grow up much more quickly than a human being. I've kind of, in my experience, the first year I was 8. So 8 Buddha years for every human year. And so I'd like to laugh. It's been 7 years. 7 times 8 is 56. I'm middle-aged again. Yeah, a middle-aged Buddha, 56-year-old Buddha. But that despair, the dark night, had another element. And this is when, as I got older, 2 human years, so I was 16 to 3 Buddha years, all of a sudden I thought I was so special. I was walking around and I wasn't speaking it out, but I would tell people, I woke up. I didn't learn that when this occurs, it's much better, because first of all, people don't believe you, and first of all, they find it disquieting. Why him, not me? This thing we keep to ourselves. But I was an exuberant 16-year-old, 7 to 24-year-old, wanting to share with the world. Hey, Here I am. I'm special. I'm special. And it took a while to see, probably into the fourth year, getting towards 32. I wouldn't be surprised it was really 33 Buddha years, my magic number after all, when I saw the intrusiveness, the inherent danger of the spiritual ego. And I was, embarrassed is probably too strong. Appalled is probably a pretty better word. I was appalled at my behavior for 1 second to think there was anything special. And this is the time that my journey into ordinariness, the beauty of ordinariness, took over my life. And the beauty of ordinariness is the liberating. No one is special. I just simply, through the grace of my teacher, through the grace of my personal Buddhas, my spiritual guide, I remembered what I always known. I remembered what we forget before we come into this world. Nothing special about that process. It's ordinary. Ordinary in the most beautiful sense of the word, because everyone is a Buddha. Some are sleeping, some are hibernating, some are hiding, but their day for one and all will come. And the despair, this dark period of the helplessness, was replaced by this more insidious challenge, the spiritual ego. Daunting, because it's hard to recognize, it's hard to get your head around. But it was well worth it, more than worth it, because my journey into ordinariness, which was the only way I could see to put that false image of myself as anything special. And in the journey of ordinariness, I truly began to understand the real beauty in that, the simplicity that it offers. You lose your fears. I'm fearless. I lost my fears in the egoic, and particularly the spiritual ego's death. Those fears have been suspended, surrendered, replaced by this simplicity, this beauty of the spiritual world.